I have a secret. I've been secretly in love with the older brother next door for a long time.
What?
I quietly followed him, stealthily collecting information about him, just to get a little closer to him. One day, I finally managed to sneak into his room, and then, on the wall of his room, I found a whole wall of my own photos. When I just came back home for winter break, my childhood friend dragged me out for dinner. Haley, you haven't been in a relationship in all 3 years of college. Given that you're such a beauty, you should have plenty of suitors, right? After a few drinks, my friend kept questioning me. I smiled and kept pouring drinks for her. Not interested. I'm asexual, until a tall figure appeared in my view. The neighbor's older brother was wearing a navy blue coat. His long fingers tapped on the wine glass, and he smiled at me gently. Sorry, I'm late. Haley is asexual? What a pity. I felt like I exploded into fireworks on the spot, and thought I might die just from him looking at me. I like Rocky, but my affection isn't normal. I'm not like other girls who either secretly write love letters or sneak glances at him in a crowd. I like to follow him, then secretly record everything he does in a notebook. The recorded details are painstakingly minute. When he leaves, where he hails a cab, the times and places he goes to. As long as it's within my sight, I remember every little thing he does. I know my way of liking him is not normal, but I can't help but want to record everything about him to understand all aspects of his life. I'm obsessed with him to the point of madness, like a pathological obsession. Are you drunk? You keep staring at me. That handsome face suddenly loomed large in front of me. Come help out. Your friend drank too much. We'll take her home. The man patted the back of my chair. I smiled politely at him, but I really disliked his gentleness, as it seemed to be directed at everyone. After taking my friend home, I naturally slid into the passenger seat beside him. I smiled at him obediently, watching him through the reflection in the glass. I really like him. How can he be so good-looking? How do I suppress this insane emotion? How can I fully have him? Haley, it seems like you've been ignoring me all day. The traffic light's glow reflected on his brows. He turned his head, smirking at me playfully. Have something on your mind? No worries. If I had to say, I'm just thinking about you. But I never act so pathological in front of him. No, probably just too much to drink. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and looked up at him. Professor Rocky, what were you going to say earlier? He leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the steering wheel. After a moment, he looked up and asked, Are you really asexual? I didn't expect that question. It's okay. Such issues can generally be treated with some intervention. I happen to know a psychologist who specializes in this area. If you need help, you can contact me. After a moment of silence, he smiled. His voice was warm, his smile bright and clear. But this reminded me that Rocky is a professor in criminal psychology. So, did he see through my perversion? No. After the traffic light, he stepped on the gas, driving off. Rocky lives right next door to me. With the doors next to each other, my greatest hobby used to be spying on him through the window of my bedroom, watching his every move at home. Professor Rocky, I seem to have forgotten my keys. I rummaged through my pockets and looked up at him innocently. Are your parents not home? He locked the car, hands in his pockets, looking down at me. They're not. I deliberately left the keys behind. I knew my parents wouldn't be home in advance. The man looked down at me, and after a moment, his eyes curved into a crescent. All right then. Before your parents come back, I'll have to take you in. This wasn't my first time in Rocky's house. The decor inside actually didn't quite match his demeanor. He always gave a refined and gentle impression, but the furniture here was uniformly cold and aloof. Proud, distant, with no unnecessary decorations. I nestled into the couch, watching him busying himself in the kitchen. I suddenly felt a bit restless, wanting to spy on more. What would you like to drink? Something to sober up? He turned to look at me. Then he smiled, probably amused by my formal demeanor. What are you nervous about? It's not your first time here. Apple juice was poured into the glass in front of me. He poured a glass for each of us, then clinked his glass against mine, and drank it in one gulp. I stared at his thin lips, wanting to kiss them. Professor Rocky. I heard that a female student from your college committed suicide for you last semester. Is that true? He put down his glass and looked at me. Yeah. Do you dislike such girls? I do. Then you must dislike me too. I'm even crazier than she was. People who disregard their own lives, even if they die for me, I find it disgusting. Everyone should be clear that the only person who will stay with you till the end is yourself. In the bathroom, the shower was continuously running. Since I was staying at his place, of course, I took over his bathroom. I thought about what he said earlier. I thought, if one day he starts to hate me, I'll make him die with me. That way, it won't be just neglecting my own life. Anyway, I'm just that despicable of a person. Earlier, while Rocky was looking for drinks for me, I secretly slipped a listening device under his sofa. I dried my hair and came out of the bathroom. Before coming out, I'd already checked myself in the mirror. Though I was dressed from head to toe, nothing was left to the imagination. But the man who looked at me with a gentle smile didn't even seem to lose his composure. The room is ready for you, upstairs. Remember to lock the door and get some rest. All calm and polite. I could only force a smile at him. What can I do? In front of him, I have to be the obedient and exemplary neighbor girl. The guest room Rocky arranged for me was unremarkable. There was nothing to peek at, so I sighed and lay down on the bed. Maybe it was just that I was really tired tonight. Despite my usual good tolerance for alcohol, I fell into a heavy, disoriented sleep. In the haze, I seemed to have a dream. In the dream, my securely locked door was opened. Someone walked in, treading on the thick carpet. I wanted to see clearly, but I couldn't do anything. Then, I felt the bed sink. A deep voice, the one I yearned for. I struggled to open my eyes and, sure enough, saw those deep-set brows and eyes. So, sleeping at Rocky's house really did make me dream of him. I reached up to touch him, but he held my wrist. He lightly kissed my wrist, causing an intolerable itch. Rocky was kissing me in the dream? I really wanted to confirm if it was real, but my head was so dizzy, I could only let him do as he pleased. He lifted my chin and kissed my neck. The warm sensation made me shiver, and then his ticklish laugh echoed in my ear. Why was Rocky in the dream like this? In the dim light, with my hazy consciousness, I stared at that godlike face coming close. Then, his kiss landed on the corner of my lips. After prying open my lips, he was not gentle at all. It was pure possession, a siege, a conquest. So crazy, not at all like him, so I was definitely dreaming. It was only in the dream that he would act this way. He lifted my wrists above my head and used his knee to pry open my legs. I couldn't help but let out a soft moan. He paused, looked at me with eyes covered in thick darkness. He raised a hand, caressing the pulse at my neck. Are you awake? He asked softly and gently. I squinted at him, and in the darkness, I'd never seen him with such an obsessive gaze. Like a thick fog, drawing you into confusion the closer you get. I reached out, wanting to touch him. Rocky. He raised an eyebrow. If only it weren't a dream. I dropped my hand. After a moment, he chuckled softly, tracing my lips with his fingers and guiding me into the most enchanting night. In the morning, I jolted up from the bed. Morning light streamed through the window, and birds chirped sweetly in the bright day. I looked down at the blanket in front of me, neat and clean, with no mess. It really was just a crazy dream last night. I touched my cheek with the back of my hand. The content of the dream was so embarrassing that it made my face flush even thinking about it. But why? Just a dream, and my body feels a bit strange? So when I couldn't steady myself and had to hold onto the stairs, kneeling in front of the man, this thought came to mind. Perhaps spring dreams really do have physical effects. What's wrong? Why the big gesture so early in the morning? He leaned against the stairs, smiling at me. He reached out to support me, but the moment I touched his hand, the image of his large hand from last night's dream suddenly popped into my mind. I pushed him away suddenly. In an instant, I realized my own rudeness. What if he thinks I'm impolite? What if he stops liking me? What if he thinks I'm awful? My thoughts raced uncontrollably until my bangs were gently brushed aside. Didn't sleep well last night? Are you not used to the bed? Thankfully, he was always so gentle. Breakfast was a tomato ketchup ham sandwich and a cup of hot milk. You look like you didn't sleep well. The man in front of me smiled gently. He seemed to enjoy smiling, but strangely, when he smiled, it made the distance between us feel greater. Last night, I had a nightmare, I said absently. It wasn't really a nightmare. If I could, I would even want to have it a few more times. Dreams are manifestations of the subconscious. If you'd like to tell me what you dreamed about, I'd be happy to analyze it for you. Almost forgot, this man is into psychology. His smile always seemed to carry deeper meaning. You were so affectionate with me in the dream. Of course, I couldn't say that. I quickly finished my breakfast and said to him, "It seems like my parents are back home. I'm heading back now. Thank you, Professor Rocky, for letting me stay the night." The man sat in his chair, smiling slightly. I felt my cheeks flush under his gaze. It seems that all parents find their children an eyesore at home. After peacefully coexisting with my parents for 3 days, I was kicked out by the 2 elderly folks. I had no choice but to drag my best friend out shopping. I say, "Haley, don't you have any crushes at all? Why are you so obsessed with matchmaking?" I bit down on my straw and looked down at my blog. I have a special account dedicated to following Rocky. Unfortunately, he not only posts rarely but also shares only research results related to criminal psychology. Then I saw that he liked a blog post titled Peeping Toms and Sexual Behavior Studies. It gave me the creeps. I get it now. Your crush must be him. At that moment, my best friend grabbed my shoulder. I jumped in surprise, and then her gaze fell on my phone. Just as I thought, it is him, I heard her say. At that moment, I even thought about where I would bury my friend of 7 years in the yard. Then she continued, Tony, your high school desk mate. I knew it. You still can't forget him. It turned out that my best friend had completely overlooked Rocky's infrequent posts. And this Tony. He seemed to be someone I followed with a secondary account back in high school for some reason, and just never deleted. So, he was my desk mate. In situations like this, I could only laugh it off. Unexpectedly, my friend got even more excited. I always thought you two were a great match back in high school. Tony even mentioned you at the last dinner. Don't be shy. Love is about taking chances. What if you succeed by taking just one step? Don't be shy. I understand that, but unfortunately, it doesn't apply to me and Rocky. I'm fine just watching him from a distance. If he rejects me or looks at me with disgust, I'd go crazy. I can't believe it. Haley, is that really a coincidence? My friend's excited tone brought me back to reality. Then I was stunned. In front of the store across from us, holding a milk teacup, was Tony. But what made my heart race was the man standing next to him, dressed in a black trench coat, calmly staring at me. It was Rocky. So, you two are related? I only knew that Professor Rocky is Haley's neighbor. Tony, you're Haley's high school desk mate. So you two are actually relatives. My friend exclaimed beside me, marveling at how small the world was. But once my gaze fixed on Rocky, it wouldn't move. Well, this makes things easy. My friend nudged me in the shoulder. You can have your neighbor brother help you with Tony, who's helping whom is still uncertain. Realizing that my friend had completely mistaken things, I could only force a smile and urge her to drop the subject. So our outing turned into a gathering of 4, especially since my friend kept encouraging me to be with Tony. She ordered us the couple's ice cream. For meals, she insisted that Tony and I sit together. With the couple discount, she pushed us into it. After all this, it was clear to everyone what was happening. The key was, Tony showed no sign of rejection. I stared at his reddened ears, realizing that I might really be delaying his life. I quickly distanced myself from him and ended up bumping into someone else. The man looked down at me with a faint smile. I noticed that since earlier, Rocky had been quietly observing us, saying nothing. But at that moment, I felt a chill down my spine. Haley. He called my name, his tone lingering and gentle. What's wrong? Your hair tie broke. I heard him laugh softly. As expected, my hair fell down the next second. Not a good excuse. My hair tie didn't break naturally. In the end, my friend, who had her own agenda, dragged the 3 of us into a haunted house. The haunted house was fine. I've never been afraid of these things since I was a kid. The key was, the haunted house was a haven for couples. At this point, who I was with was entirely up to my friend. We chose the most terrifying haunted house, which had a lot of single-person paths. Right now, I was wandering alone in a pitch-black corridor. Suddenly, a ghost screamed and lunged at me. Maybe it was because I had followed Rocky through dark paths so many times before. Or maybe it's that people like me, with a dark disposition, understand ghosts better. I awkwardly smiled as the ghost pushed and prodded me along. When I reached the end of the corridor and pushed open the door, I saw Rocky, who was searching for clues while scratching his chin. In that moment, I went from calm to flustered, from cheerful to terrified. I threw myself into Rocky's arms, almost in tears. There's a ghost, it's so scary. Thank you, dimly lit room. Thank you, diligently screaming ghost. Finally, I had a perfect excuse to embrace him. I clearly felt that the ghost chasing me hesitated for a moment, then let out a soft hum. It locked us in this confined, narrow space. This ghost deserves a 5-star rating for its effort. In the dark space, my hands were all over him, until I heard him grunt softly. I found myself restrained by his grip on my wrist. If you keep touching, I'll have to make you responsible. His nose brushed lightly against mine. A subtle, almost indifferent threat. The haunted house was still playing eerie music. The atmosphere was perfectly set. I pretended to be terrified, shrinking into his embrace. Rocky's chest was so warm, it was just exactly like my dream. I felt his fingers idly grazing my hair. It was an ideal moment for flirting, but the man was even more indifferent than a saint. The space was so small that we were practically pressed together. I heard his breath, which sprayed on my ear when he laughed. I heard, "You like my nephew?" One sentence, and my brain short-circuited. What? Who told you that? The denial I wanted to give suddenly got stuck on my lips. Your friend. She pulled me aside when you went to the restroom and said. He slowly pronounced each word in my ear. She said you like Tony and want to be with him. Huh, really? He nudged me with his knee, making me unable to speak. I grabbed his sleeve, thinking rapidly about how to respond. In that moment, I thought that if I didn't deny it, Rocky might not guess that I like him and might lower his guard around me. Then maybe I could steal more information about him? I gritted my teeth and carefully replied. Just a bit. A bit? I clearly felt him smile, as if he bit his teeth, and I suddenly wasn't sure what his emotions were. He shifted positions, and I ended up sitting on his lap due to his movement. Our seating position was quite strange, but I didn't want to say anything, letting him tilt his head back. In the dim light, his Adam's apple was especially prominent. My nephew isn't the best. I remember Tony won the Good Student Award when he was my desk mate. You seem to know him well. I felt Rocky's curled fingers brushing against my waist. A thin layer of callus raised an odd itch. Professor Rocky, I called him. Good students are usually bad, you know? But you must be good at studying too, Rocky. I looked into his eyes and said, so I'm bad too. The next second, the door of the secret room popped open. It turned out that he had been curling his fingers to unlock the code. He tidied his clothes, looking serious, leaning against the code door, and asked me cleanly, do you need me to help you? Why are your legs so weak? His eyes curved into crescent moons, with an innocent expression. In terms of experience, my best friend and Tony should have had a better time than Rocky and me, because during the time we were locked up, they were being chased by ghosts. This made my friend say she wanted to eat steak to make up for it. After eating steak, she dragged us to drink, winking at me madly, as if she was determined to get Tony and me drunk. In a small, less crowded tavern by the river, I watched the bottles of alcohol swaying. Get me drunk? A person like me, who pretends, has never really been drunk since childhood. But Rocky's face beside me had a faint blush. He seemed to be not very good at drinking, casting a sidelong glance at me. Really like him, huh? He asked, nonchalantly shaking his long legs near the swaying, drunken Tony. I stared at him blankly. He looked so handsome, his collar a bit disheveled, a button undone, eyes narrowed like a satisfied fox. Testing me, I slowly nodded, wanting to see his reaction. A bottle of alcohol was kicked askew by someone's movement. I suddenly fell into his embrace. Hot and intimate. For some reason, my gaze shifted to the reflection in the glass. From there, it seemed like we were a pair, intimately close lovers. What are you thinking? My nose was lightly tapped. Call a car for them. And one for us too. The light from the phone screen fell on the man's softly smiling eyes. It turned out that the intimate gesture just now was only to get me to support him. He really was drunk. For some reason, I felt a bit angry and pulled away from him. He leaned back, resting against the wall, watching me. People are indeed visual animals. When he looked at me with that somewhat innocent expression, I couldn't be angry at all. I called a car. After stuffing my drunken friend and Tony into the car, I shoved him into the car as well. By the time the car slowly arrived downstairs, it was just him and me again. Professor Rocky, are you a bit clearer now? Under the pale streetlight of the night, I looked up at him. His deep gaze seemed to swallow everything, slowly focusing on me, thick and suffocating. Are you really drunk? I didn't know why I had this doubt, until he smiled, his eyes curved like a crescent moon. Want to come over to my place? What reason would a pervert like me have to refuse? I was like the sailors on the Odyssey, unable to resist the siren's song, and unable to escape his enticing interest. This was the second time this month I was in his house. This time, I seemed to have more autonomy. After all, the man was currently lying on his own sofa. Rocky, do you have any hangover remedies? I asked him, peeking from the kitchen, but he didn't answer. So I took a deep breath and began to observe this large house. Since the day I met Rocky, I knew I had become strange. I had never liked a man like this before. I didn't even know if this was called liking. I just wanted to possess him, to be the only one in his eyes, to know everything related to him, everything. I went crazy studying his preferences, stalking him, using DVDs to spy on him, collecting everything related to him. When I secretly glimpsed his unknown side, my adrenaline would surge. There's a term for people like us, called voyeur. I've been afraid more than once, afraid of being discovered, afraid of being exposed in front of everyone. At that time, what would they say? So Haley, who was always so virtuous, turned out to be such a dirty person. So disgusting, why does someone like her deserve to live in this world? I was afraid of having my glamorous exterior stripped away, but I couldn't help but dive into the mire, because I couldn't ignore the exquisite treasures there. To me, after calling him a couple of times with no response from the sofa, I licked my lips, feeling a bit restless. Although I had been to his house many times, there was one place I had never been. That was his room. I admit, having this kind of mindset is somewhat perverted. I wanted to know everything about him, to peek into his most private territory. So now, I stepped lightly, walking towards the sofa. The man's eyes were slightly closed. He looked defenseless when asleep. His room should be on the 3rd floor. I supported myself on the stairs and slowly went up. My heart began to race with each step. Finally, when I reached the door of his room, my curiosity reached its peak. His room was right in front of me. Just a quick look at his room. Take a few photos with my phone. It wouldn't be a big deal, right? I always hide well, so my friends often praise me for being good and cute. In fact, when facing Boyulin, I know I am vile. But who doesn't have a dark side? I always excuse myself like this. I took a deep breath, placing my hand on the door handle. As I turned the handle and the door creaked open, the dim light of the room revealed the entire bedroom, clearly laid out in front of me. In this space filled with personal aura, the entire wall was covered with my photos. I instinctively took a step back. Then, I bumped into a scorching chest. I didn't think you'd be interested in my nephew. So what? So I'm not playing anymore. The man's teasing tone fell beside my ear, gently playing with the back of my neck. I almost thought it was a hallucination from drinking too much, but the strength on the back of my neck told me it wasn't an illusion. He grabbed my waist and pushed me into the room. Then he closed the door, pinched my neck, and made me look at the photos on the wall. It's you. My vision swayed, but his tone was clear and neat. Why, I didn't finish my sentence before I was forced to endure his deep kiss. Damp, oppressive, like churning seawater. My body hit the headboard. I thought I would hurt, but he raised his hand to block it for me. Rocky, are you drunk? Drunk? He looked down and chuckled softly, untying his tie, wrapped it around his wrist, then patted the outside of my thigh. Sit straight. I don't know why I suddenly listened to him. I'm not drunk. Haley, pretending. Isn't that your best? Why pretend? I watched as he wound the tie around my wrists. Now I'm sitting on his bed, really at his mercy. I looked up, watching his Adam's apple roll in the flickering light. Sexy as hell. I have to say, Rocky really is quite pretentious. The next second I couldn't stand it, and he pushed me down on the bed. He rubbed his thumb against the corner of my lips, then his slender fingers went in, teasing me. I feel like these things I should do to him, not he to me. It's like I should tell him I'm the pervert, not him. The world has turned upside down, but I can't even speak. I had imagined countless times in my mind what I would do to him if I tied him up, but now he's turned the tables on me. I can only endure. I suddenly realized something. Perhaps that dream that day was real. I hugged his back. Due to the excitement, I randomly scratched a blood mark on his back. Rocky. How did it become like this? He laughed, and I knew what he was thinking when he curved his eyebrows and eyes. Not much less dirty than me. Haley. He called my name, deliberately nibbling. Sensations brought by pain, then extinguished. I know you installed a bug in my house. It's illegal, but I'm not going to call the police. It's right here now, and we'll listen to it together afterwards, okay? Adding threats. He really is very physically strong, so much so that I can hardly bear it. I stared at the light leaking through the curtain, realizing that this might be the next day. He was holding a piece of aluminum foil in his mouth, still in the mood to tease me. Want to run? Then I was dragged back by the ankle. Continue. After that, I was basically absent for half the time. When I woke up again, it was already the evening of the next day. The setting sun's light was scattered on the messy bedding. I stared at the photos on the wall. To be fair, Rocky's photography skills are quite good. Each shot is well angled, and some even have annotations. As for what the annotations are, when I wanted to take a closer look, someone covered my eyes. Then I was pulled into his arms and kissed deeply. He, surprisingly, still had the strength. Rocky, don't. It was obvious that my resistance was ineffective, and the end was from the bedroom bed to the bathroom. At least he finally cleaned me up. When my mind was a bit clearer, it was already night. He carried me to the dining table. My numb brain could finally think. But first, I was attracted by the fragrance in front of me. Pig stomach mushroom chicken porridge. He smiled and rubbed my head. Eat something first? I was really hungry. The porridge was just the right temperature, melting in the mouth, and tasted good. But obviously, I shouldn't be bought off by a simple bowl of porridge at this time. You? I looked up sharply, but met his eyes, full of laughter. Did you know I was following you all along? I stirred the spoon slightly, thinking about where to start. He still just looked at me. I began to understand that he knew more than I imagined. So all my dirty and secret thoughts were exposed a lot. It's too shameful. I put down the spoon in a huff and heard him laugh across the table. What are you looking for? A hole in the ground. Maybe I'm not suitable for living in this world. Nothing. When you were looking at me, I was also looking at you. He picked up the spoon again, scooped a mouthful of porridge and brought it to my mouth, and I bit it. I think the advantage is, in terms of darkness and pretense, neither of us is inferior. His smile is seductive, pure, and teasing. Be good, eat more. Don't cry on my body again at night. Blindly shouting husband, saying you have no strength left. Not a buddy. Are you still coming? In the following days, I told my parents that I had joined a travel group with my best friend and had gone wild out of town. In reality, I was just in another house less than 100 meters from home, in a different room. I was being tossed around by him. In the dark, his kisses fell on my neck. He was always gentle, though. When he smiled and coaxed me, my heart nearly flew out. But when I looked in the mirror, I could see how wildly chaotic the marks he left were. I realized he was truly wicked. I spent 2 days and nights in a daze like this. During those 2 days, I became so familiar with his house that it was almost as if I knew it better than my own. After a shower, he held me and used a hairdryer to dry my hair. But as he was drying it, we ended up kissing again. By the time he was done, my hair was almost dry. The man curled the ends of my hair with his fingers and said lightly, "I'll go out later to buy some necessities." Necessities? Is there something missing at home? I remember we have enough rice, oil, salt. I was a bit puzzled. He stared at me and smiled. I got it. My face burned red. New Year's, the supermarket and delivery services had stopped. Rocky went out to buy necessities. I was alone in his house. The clothes scattered on the sofa were so embarrassing that anyone would be ashamed. I picked them up and tidied them. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I thought someone had come back, so without thinking, I went to open the door. "Didn't you bring a key?" The sentence was abruptly cut off, because the person outside the door was Tony. Tony. I was still wearing his uncle's coat. You, no, damn it. After stumbling through words for a second, he finally expressed his feelings clearly. "If I say I'm just a neighbor visiting Rocky, would you believe me?" I hid the clothes of me and Rocky behind me. Who would believe that? The boy in front of me looked like he was on the verge of breaking down. "No, my uncle really likes you. Aren't you his research subject?" "What research?" He bit the last word lightly, but I still caught it. No, I didn't say anything. Realizing he had let something slip, he quickly waved his hands and tried to laugh it off. "So you'll be my aunt from now on? I call you aunt, you call me brother, and we'll each go our own way. How about that?" But I just stared at him solemnly. "What research subject?" He paused, then gave me a vague smile, and I stared at him intently. Suddenly, a possibility dawned on me. A possibility I had overlooked. I came to find my uncle. If he's not here, I'll leave. I wish you and my uncle a happy life, a happy marriage, early birth of precious children, prosperity as vast as the East Sea, longevity as the South Mountain. He laughed and backed away while helping me close the door. He was almost as smooth as Michael Jackson, perhaps realizing he had really messed up. After he left, I stood alone in the empty room. Thoughts of how the man had softly coaxed me these days floated in my mind. Perhaps, once you've fallen in love, you become increasingly eager to test and experience everything. I dashed into his room. The notes that had been next to my photos had indeed been removed by him at some unknown time. The trash can in the room also had no scraps of paper. He had indeed covered his tracks flawlessly. Finally, I arrived at the door to the basement of his house. This was one of the 2 places he had never allowed me to enter. It had a password lock. I tried my birthday. It opened. This place seemed to be used as an archive room. Bookshelves were lined with notebooks. When I opened one, I found it contained notes related to various experiments. I knew that Rocky's research specialty had always been criminal psychology. In these notebooks, he detailed his studies of certain pathological patients. Paraphilia, exhibitionism, and voyeurism and stalking. As I searched through the notes, I desperately hoped not to find my name, but I still found it, neatly recorded. The notes detailed everything about me, written in a meticulous and scientific tone. Peeping is done discreetly, making it hard to detect. The key subjective factor for the patient is the pursuit of perfect adventure and stimulation. Will there be interesting reactions under external stimulation? I closed the notebook, feeling a deep, unsettling shiver. What does external stimulation mean? Is it kissing me? Is it having sex with me? As a research subject, so it was always like this. I stood alone in the mire while he observed and studied me from above. He wasn't a pervert like me, but for someone as filthy as me, he was much more detestable than a mere pervert. I put the notebook back in place. After finding my clothes, I left his house. I told my parents that the tour group had one more day to go. I walked alone on the street. As New Year's Eve approached, there was a festive atmosphere everywhere. Children ran by with chocolate cakes, and old alleys rang with a series of bells. But I only felt a burning in my eyes. Rocky called me. I didn't answer. He kept calling. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore and picked up. "Are you annoying or what?" I almost said it with a sob. I had cracked. "Sorry." As soon as I answered, he started with an apology. Yes, this person was really smart. He could figure out what had happened as soon as he got home. Maybe he had even anticipated what I would say and guessed it all. "Dr. Rocky, is your research going well? Have you figured out what kind of neurotic I am? You must have some research results now. Are you preparing to write about me in a journal article?" I rattled off a series of statements, only to realize that I was the one feeling more distressed. Is the next step to break up with me and then study how someone with voyeuristic tendencies would cling to you crazily? He was silent on the other end of the phone. It seemed he was considering, but I didn't want to care about the lies he would meticulously weave after thorough thinking. I hung up the phone. Then I stood alone, crying over a chocolate cake vendor. "Mommy, buy that lady a chocolate cake. She's crying from craving it." And I heard a little girl by the roadside say that. It broke me again. I wandered back to that riverside tavern from last time. This time, it seemed there were more people there. I heard that girls had a half-price discount, so I ordered a lot of drinks. A lot, because I knew, no matter how much I drank, I would never get drunk. They say drinking away sorrow is a lie. I would only feel more miserable the more I drank. The more I drank, the more I thought about Rocky. I was really at my wit's end. Maybe this really was a disease that needed treatment. If I could forget him, I would be happy. "Sister, drinking alone?" A man in a flowery shirt and with bleached hair danced up to me. "Get lost." I irritably shooed him away. "Oh, you've got some personality. Go to hell." I stopped midway through my curse, because I saw the silhouette in front of me. Seeing him, I still had a curse-filtered attribute. Rocky gently pressed down on the man's shoulder. "Buddy, turn left to flirt with girls. This is my wife." Wife? He really dared to say it. I stared at him with reddened eyes. The man's hairstyle was a bit messy, and his collar wasn't as neat as usual. He was either in a hurry to find me or doing it deliberately. Pretending. "Drink?" He sat across from me and clinked his bottle against mine. "No. I'm planning to sleep with that blonde." It was meant to irritate him. "You want to repeat that?" I couldn't see his expression, but he was definitely smiling. "I said I want to sleep with that blonde." My lips were covered. It was a bit of a forceful kiss, tinged with the alcohol he had just swallowed. Burning. I pushed him away, but this time he didn't let me. He made sure the kiss ended. When it was over, I slapped him. He tilted his head slightly, his disheveled hair covering his eyes. "Good hit," I heard him say. "Are you crazy?" "Yes." Again. Fresh, inscrutable tone. He always spoke to me like this. "If I don't cooperate with your research, Dr. Rocky, will you stop pretending to love me?" "What do you mean by pretending to love you?" He nudged my leg under the table. "Still pretending," I said. He laughed. "Your definition of pretending is quite strange, Miss Haley." I didn't want to argue with him, so I stood up. He followed me closely. "I know this is difficult because when I approached you, I had ulterior motives. So, in the current situation, I anticipated it and indeed found it hard to handle. I didn't want to hear his rational analysis. I felt that kind of thing was just another form of male excuse, a clever defense. So I walked faster. He followed me steadily. "Haley, do you think you're filthy? Do you have to poke at my pain?" I suddenly turned around to look at him, and saw him looking at me with eyes full of stars. "Actually, I am the most filthy, despicable, and dark one. Because I fell in love with my research subject as I studied, and I couldn't extricate myself. This was a severe blow to my career 3 years ago. My resolve was shattered, and I was truly ready to retreat into the mountains. But that morning, when I saw you smiling and greeting me, you know, the sunshine was perfect that day. I immediately reverted." He came closer and looked at me, innocently opening his eyes, tilting his head. "Why are you silent?" I twisted my ankle. "Rocky." I lay on his back, swaying the new spring windmill I had snatched from a child's hand. "Rocky, don't lie to me." "Lie to you about what?" "Lie to me, say you love me. If you really do that, I'll die with you." I poked his clearly visible carotid artery with the windmill's handle. "Then I'll write your name in my memo every day." "What for?" I leaned in to ask him. "So that if I die, you'll be the first one they suspect." Really sick, and quite aware of crisis management. For some reason, I laughed, lying on his back as he jostled me. "Don't move around," he said. At that moment, the New Year's fireworks were burning brightly in the sky. "Haley, actually, I'm really bad with words. I don't know how to tell you," so I hesitated for a long time. "I always stutter and can't express myself well. So, forget it, I love you." As the fireworks burned out, I heard him say softly. I wrapped my arms around his neck. He turned to look at me. "Are you asleep?" He chuckled. "Really picking your moment." The long, winding road was sprinkled with stardust. It was the most unforgettable winter I've ever experienced. I have a secret. I've had a crush on the neighbor's older brother for a long time. Now, he has a secret too, and the answer to that secret is me.